Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm Liza Lawrence. I'm glad to have you join me as we celebrate wonders and miracles together. All right. Well, I am here with Heather today from New York, and she's currently living in Salt Lake City, Utah. But she's going to share a miracle story with us that happened about a year ago when she had a stroke. And I have not heard all the details of this yet, so I'm very excited to have her share and to share all these details. So Heather, thank you so much for being on the show, and tell us what happened.
I'm excited to be here, and I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah. I've been here for 5 or 6 years, and it was about a year ago I was skiing. I'm a ski race coach at Snowbird here in Utah, and I was having a group of 10 or 11-year-olds off piste, so off the main trail and in the woods. And the start of it was really on the trail, I think. And oddly, it wasn't like I was under stress. On the contrary, I had almost a spiritual experience out there. I ski all the time. I'm in the most beautiful ski setting. I mean, one of the most beautiful places in the world to ski, but I had come out into this vista I had never seen before. And it was like this epic, looked almost like Bavaria, scene in Utah. And I had this like, moment of like complete and utter contentment. To a degree, it was like euphoric. I had actually never experienced that before. It was complete euphoria. And I'm so content and happy with my life right now. Like it was just a peaceful, utter contentment, but so profound that it was like something happened. It was just this really profound spiritual moment I had with myself. I didn't tell anybody. I was with some 11-year-olds. And we just continued to ski down, and that was our last run of the day. Kids, pack up and go. And I'm with all the coaches in what we call the race shack, and I'm a bunch of the guys, and I'm taking my boots off. And neurology thinks maybe in the moment of taking my boots off, possibly a clot was dislodged. And so our bodies are always producing clots all the time. And I have no weird health history. I'm like in really good health, a former pro athlete, but in most people, the lungs tend to filter those out. But about a quarter of us are walking around with something called a PFO, which is a patent foramen ovale. It's a functional hole that exists in utero, in pregnancy, in babies. And after birth, it's designed to fuse and close, protecting, the middle of the heart from blood sloshing back and forth. And about 25% of us, they feel we never close ours. And so where most people would dislodge a normal clot in the leg or something and filter to the lungs, mine, they believe, went over to the wrong side of the heart and shipped directly to my brain. Wow. So I was walking out of the race shack and having conversations with people on the way to my car, and got in my car with my skis and started to drive. And I don't normally talk on the phone and driving, but this day I did. I'm a single mom of 5, ranging from college age down to 5 years old. And I was talking to my 13-year-old daughter on the phone, luckily, because we were dealing with massive logistics. So she was coming off another mountain. And I said to her, I'll call you when I get out of the canyon. And it came out, and my brain was working okay. So I could tell I just couldn't get the words out. And I said to myself, let's try that again. And then my left arm starts floating across the car, and I'm driving. And I'm like, I think I'm having a stroke. I mean, there was no way I'm having a stroke, but I'm a clinician, so I understood the signs of stroke. And I thought, I think I'm having a stroke. Oh my gosh, like my left arm is gone and my speech is completely gone. So I knew something was happening, and my brain was fully functional, but I knew something was wrong. And I'm driving, I'm behind the wheel. And so I use my functional arm, because this one's like drifting and I have no control or feeling of it. I can just see it drifting across as I'm driving down the mountain canyon. And it's very slow, luckily traffic, 2 lanes, traffic going next to each other. And I get my passenger window down. I hang up with my daughter because she's like, Mommy, I don't understand you. She thought it was bad service, but in hindsight, it was like, oh. I get my passenger window down and flag the car down next to me for help. I honk. They roll their window down, and I said, I'm having trouble speaking, and I've lost control of my left arm. Because by then, my speech had started to come back, and it was a cardiologist in the car next to me. So that was like miracle number one,
Yeah.
and or maybe number three, I don't know. But so I was able to pull over in front of them, and they pulled over with me, and she came over, and he's calling 911. She comes over to my window and is assessing, and she goes, "You don't look like you're having a life-threatening stroke right now." So the whole event was like 30 to 45 seconds.
Hmm.
But I knew I could still feel something was off. Like when that happens, you have a traumatic brain injury. So it almost feels like a concussion, I guess. Like you're just disoriented and it's like you've been hit in the head, even though you haven't been. And then I ride the ambulance down the mountain, which was there very quickly. And they just thought dehydration, all my vitals were perfect. My blood sugar was okay. I was talking normally, I was making jokes. And so I just said, I want to go home. Like I wasn't going to let them take me to the hospital. And so they just said, if you have any of these signs, you need to go in. So I had my son pick me up, drive me home, and I just didn't feel right. And I get home, and an hour later, my hand goes tingly very significantly, and I felt nauseous. And as a clinician, it's always two signs. One is like something, but in the presence of two strange things. So just based on that, I said, I got to go in. I mean, I'm a home birth midwife. I have teenagers that have never seen a medical doctor. So, like, this was a major thing for me to make the decision to go into the hospital. And I had questionable insurance. So I had Samaritan Ministries, one of those Christian healthcare, which, by the way, I can get into that if you want later. A miracle. Like
Wow.
they're amazing. I would recommend anybody look at any of those Christian health share programs for insuring themselves. It's just really remarkable. Yeah, I had my son drive me to the hospital, and he had to hold the fort down at home because dad's across the country. I live in Utah, he's in Vermont, and I said I can do this by myself. So I was by myself, and I had an MRI within 20 minutes of arriving, and they showed the picture I sent you, which was a pretty profound class 2 out of 3 right frontal lobe stroke, because there's different degrees. So out of 3 degrees of stroke, level 1, level 2, level 3 being the worst, like, death or nursing home sort of thing, I had level 2. So
Wow.
it was big.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
I'm in
Yeah.
shock at your function right now. Like, amazing.
It happened in the emotional region of my brain, and that's the interesting part of it.
Oh,
It was like
yes.
emotional, social skills, executive functioning. Yeah, so they sent me to the big stroke center of Utah, the bigger hospital, where I spent 4 days, and I had stroke protocols really interesting. I had to wear a monitor. So if I even sat up in bed, the nurses were alarmed. I had to be cleared to get up and go to the bathroom by myself. I had to be cleared to sip water. I had to be cleared to eat Jello. I had to be cleared to swallow food by physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. So it was really interesting to go through that. And you're on a floor with like all 90-year-olds, and I'm hearing this healthy 45-year-old with no family history of this or no medical history that would, no cholesterol, no blood pressure. So in the MRI was a pretty profound spiritual experience as well. So I don't know if you wanted to wait on that or get
I would
into that.
love to hear that, but will you explain real quick what the right temporal lobe is in charge of? Because I think that's interesting,
Sure.
where the
And
stroke was
it
located.
was right frontal lobe, and right frontal lobe is the emotional region of the brain, executive functioning, which is like social cues where we, receive and act upon normal social functioning, and also risk taking, decision making. So it's a pretty important region. So while people assume stroke is, fine motor skills or walking or eating or swallowing, which because elderly people often will have those things, a lot of us don't think about what happens when the emotional region of the brain is damaged. And it was frightening to think about what the outlook was going to be for me. But it's also been kind of funny because I almost think I'm better after the stroke, if that's possible.
Nice.
I always joke it killed the right brain cells, I think. As a woman and a midwife, I mean, I was always almost over empathetic. And for a while, I felt a little more wired like a man. And as a single woman, it's funny, we get what we ask for. I'd be out there dating and I just wouldn't understand, like, why, these men couldn't relate to like my complex, emotional wiring. And all of a sudden I find myself like completely wired like a man for a long time, and maybe still to some extent, like in terms of just, I have thresholds now emotionally. So it's really manifested with my own teens and their drama. And I have a limit to how much I can handle.
Mm.
And in the early months of recovery, it was very low. And I would be like, peace out. I'm going in my room and shutting the door. And I just couldn't engage. I would just check
Yeah.
out of the conversation because my brain, or even talking like this, would have been very difficult 2 or 3 months out, where I would feel like I was going to pass out. And I was like, oh, this is probably how most men feel when they're
Wow.
dating me.
That's awesome. Very interesting. Very interesting. So you mentioned you had a spiritual experience in the MRI. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm alone in like a small city hospital in Salt Lake City and feeling a little bit sorry for myself that like no life partner is here negotiating this with me. But, as a midwife and a clinician, like I know how to advocate for myself. It was just a bummer that I'm like bearing the weight of this frightening verdict. And part of me really wanted to wait in denial. I knew this MRI, like, they were looking for stroke. And I was like, there's no way I had a stroke, right? Like I really was kind of in that space, but part of me knew something
Mhm.
so profound had happened. I could feel it. And I was in the MRI, which lasts about 20 minutes, and it was very noisy. I had never had one before. And it was like tick, 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 tick. And you're very claustrophobic. You're in this like little box, which felt a little overwhelming. So it takes a lot to really settle into that and calm and let that happen. And while I was in there, my brain is firing like, what has just happened and what is going to happen to me and what's this mean? And, am I going to lose my children? I mean, my brain is like all over the place. And in that moment, it was like, I've never spoken this out loud because it's so like, but there were definitely angels there. There were definitely like, cause you can't see anything and you're in a box. I think my eyes had to be closed. I think if I opened them, it was going to make me sick. There was like a parade of,
Mm.
I just saw angels. And it wasn't like I was having a near death experience. It wasn't like that. It just was like, I'm going to be okay. They're like doing the work that whatever needs to happen in my brain to like sew it together or make sure I was going to be okay.
Mhm.
And I mean, I can't say that that gave me a ton of peace. I just noticed it and it was super interesting. And I haven't been religious for a couple of years. I was very, very committed to the faith I was in for a good 10 or 12 years. And then the last couple of years I backed off, but I haven't been to services for a couple of years or practiced in any way, shape, or form. And I had this very distinct, for 20 minutes while I'm sitting there, just like angels at work is the only way I
Wow.
could describe it. Like working on my brain or making sure I was going to be okay, if that
I
makes
love
any
that.
sense.
Yes.
I just felt like watched over, taken care of. I can't explain, I don't understand it, but it was a very distinct vision of angels. And I didn't feel like I was dying or on the brink of death or anything like that. It just felt like they were knitting together a pathway for me to be okay through
That is amazing. I
this.
love that.
It
Truly.
was.
I love that because I completely believe that we have angels on the other side that are intervening in our lives in so many ways that we're very unaware of. How neat you got a glimpse of that in
Yeah,
that
like
moment.
I could like a distinct visual because there's nowhere to go. So it was, I mean, I don't know if meditative state, but I mean there was nothing that could distract me. It was just a stillness, and in that stillness I was allowed to see.
I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. That is amazing. That is really beautiful.
Yeah, and when I look back at the fact that I'm so highly functional, not only that, but almost better in many ways. My skiing improved. I take more risks in my skiing in a positive way. I'm on a big mountain that requires, some bravery to ski, and my skiing has improved and people have noticed. My relations with men have incredibly improved. I
Wow.
think when I was going through this, I was like, am I going to be in a nursing home? Am I going to lose my kids? Or who's going to want to date someone who's just had a major stroke? Because that's like a huge potential risk and responsibility, right? Like, and how is my behavior going to maybe change and make it worse? I mean, I got incredible increased empathy for men because I all of a sudden had or have a glimpse of how their brains are more wired different from ours. And it's allowed me to check my behavior, I think, or like my my communication with them because I can relate to what their thresholds are. It's been a really incredible gift. It really
Yeah.
has. And I think my love life's improved. My business tripled because the other thing is who's going to hire a midwife? You know, I'm an independent entrepreneur. You know, I'm a
Hmm.
one woman show. So people
Yeah.
hire me for home birth. And the other thing was who's going to hire a midwife who just had a stroke, a home birth midwife. And my business tripled last year.
Wow.
Tripled. Like I've been practicing for 10 years, waiting kind of for this moment, and it completely tripled. And now I'm in a place where I can independently take care of my children and complete
That's
financial
amazing.
independence has occurred. So yeah, all these like gifts occurred that somehow I attribute to this. But I had a heart surgery related to it about a month later. So stroke in February, and then March of last year, they closed the PFO because they believed that's where it
Wow.
came from. They went through my groin and inserted a 3 centimeter titanium Gore-Tex device in the middle of my heart. So blood would not slosh back and forth anymore.
And is that supposed to be closed?
In most people, so 75% of the people, it does close in the
Okay.
weeks or months after birth, and about 25% of us don't. So when young people, I almost think looking for this should be like
Yeah.
colonoscopies, because a few months ago, the missionary who converted me, his wife and he were in Rome, and she's healthy and 30, young mother. She had the same thing. She stroked in Rome from a
Wow.
PFO. And I was like, okay, that's two of us in a social circle. I think people
Yeah.
should be looking at these like colonoscopies if they have them, because then maybe you take baby aspirin or
Right.
something. My cardiologist said, no, it's so rare. And I
Mm.
thought, I don't know. I know two of us now. And then now not ever hearing about this. It's like stories out of the woodwork are coming that it's happening more than we think. So
Huh.
like people with PFO should never scuba dive, because when you're rising up, the bubbles actually get in your bloodstream and that can cause stroke. So young, healthy people who stroke when they're scuba diving.
Oh my goodness. So tell us a little bit about your recovery process, because you are super high functioning. Like I look at
Yeah.
you and I think just a year ago you had a stroke. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, my personality is definitely one. And so this is a little more on the spiritual side too, I think, because I do believe like we are responsible for deciding what we want, and then the spirit and the spiritual mechanisms come in and help facilitate that, right? So like I'm a huge believer in that. And I know where I was spinning out, like, what does this mean? Oh my gosh, my life, like I'm feeling like I'm just, getting organized financially and everything, and then this happens. I'm going to have $100,000 bill and my insurance is I mean, it was just like spinning. And while I was laying in the hospital alone for 4 days, I did have some visitors. And you do find out who your connections are. Like people do reveal yourselves I had people completely fall away from me during this. And then I had people find me or read about it on my social
Mhm.
media and find me after 30 years, and we become very close. Or, people that were kind of on the peripheral, they were the ones that, visited me in the hospital. It was just really interesting how something like this really does reveal, and a natural culling occurs in terms of your
Uh-huh.
your social circle and your loved ones, right?
Mm.
And it's very meaningful. And so I was in kind of a dark room. I couldn't have TV on.
Mhm.
I just was like dark 4 days, walking down the halls and just in my own brain. And it was kind of like a mini vacation as a single mom. I'm like, the quiet. I have teenagers. I'm like, this is a gift, the quiet. I have to go home, Actually, I made the most of it. It was like a bed and breakfast. But in there, I kind of made a decision, and, I'm big on social media. So I decided at first I was like, no one can know about this, right? Because like my dating life, my business, no one can know. And meanwhile, everybody had already known, because all the other coaches and the ski racing kids
Mm.
I coached my kids' friends were coming down the mountain. They saw my car with an ambulance. So my daughter was calling me like, are you okay? I heard you're with an ambulance. And so people kind of were talking
Uh-huh.
and something happened. So I decided, no, people are going to know, because it's almost public service announcement about this PFO. And also I like being vulnerable and just sharing my journey and being really authentic and honest about it. So I decided this isn't going to be my story. This is going to be like, I'm going to rise above this. And I just made a decision that
Mm.
there will be no negative effects from this. This is going to be
Wow.
better than I was.
Wow.
And so I just kind of made that decision in the hospital, and then got documenting, like, made sure my hair was done nice and did the hospital, selfie in the gown. And hooked up to different things, and I just started to capture it. And my life really changed when I started doing that. I mean, I do that anyway, but when I took something incredibly vulnerable like this, just started making a story about it, things got interesting. And so my recovery, though, it's brain. So like a thumbprint, no two strokes or no brain cells are the same. So they can't really tell you how
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be affected. They don't really know. Every stroke is different. Every individual is different. Every brain is different. So they're like, good luck, keep us posted. But basically what I noticed was, and I tried to get working right away, and I had a birth within 48 hours of being discharged from the hospital. And I brought another midwife because I just knew, I mean, I was exhausted. And so
Yeah.
I brought a partner in and we got it done. But when I sit in my office in prenatal appointments, a lot of it is like therapy and counseling, what's going on in your life. And I remember a couple would just come in and sit down and just talking very benignly about whatever. And I'd be sitting on my little stool and I'm like, I'm going to pass out. I'm going to pass out. I'm going to pass out. Was guess just receiving just basic communication.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the neurons were trying to go over dead space now, and they have to
Mm-hmm.
find new pathways, and that was so incredibly exhausting that I can't even put it into words, and only people that stroke really can relate to it. I remember I went skiing right away, and I remember being on the ski hill talking to one of my female colleagues, and she was just telling me some story about her daughter getting into a car accident. No big deal, no trauma, some legal drama though. And I can remember standing on the hill going, I got to ski away. I can't
Huh.
handle this conversation. I cannot. And it was just a very normal conversation. So I would just be exiting. Like I would just be like exiting. And that's not like me at all. I'm super about connection and engagement. And for many months, I was like, I can't. So stroke, unlike other ailments or cancer where you lose your hair or, like where there's obvious symptoms, stroke is like concealed. So you
Yeah.
can't, nobody really knows what the injury is. They can't
Yeah.
see it. And so the recovery is hard. And my conclusion was it was really good I wasn't married.
Mm-hmm.
It was really good I didn't have a partner. I mean, the man I was married to, the father of my children, would have been great. He would have been fine. But I know that I would have worried about what he was thinking and how
Mm-hmm.
he was feeling and what this meant for us and him. And like, if I had to deal with that on top of a recovery, it would have damaged my recovery. And so
Mm-hmm.
it was a gift that I was alone
Hmm.
in that, because it sped my recovery because I
Hmm.
wasn't carrying as a
Yeah.
woman, like we carry so much of
Yeah.
relationships. I could just recover and be responsible for that and not be responsible for somebody else.
Yeah.
And that was really important and really empowering. And there was no ever feeling sorry for myself because I was alone. I mean, just in the first few minutes of it happening. And then I was like, nope, I got this. The biggest thing that happened is after the heart surgery, when your heart absorbs the device that's now in
Mm.
there, it takes many months, even up to a year, for your heart. Like the heart is an electrical organ. So there's all sorts of misfiring that happens and PVCs, which you can feel like weird arrhythmias. So I probably should have worn a heart rate monitor. I actually checked myself back into the hospital in August because I was having such incredible arrhythmias. It was making me wonder if I was having another stroke, or I thought I was going to pass out. And I was home alone one time and I went banging on my neighbor's door because it was like, I don't know what's wrong, but my heart is like, and it causes a panic attack. I don't have a history of anxiety or anything like that. I don't have anything that would predispose me. It was just a chemical response to something happening with my heart. And it turned out fine. I had another MRI, which was interesting to show the stroke recovery was pretty significant. It was
Mm.
still there. There's still dead space there, but they said you didn't have another stroke. We think your heart rate just tanked and your blood pressure tanked, and it got like scary that you were going to pass out. So since August, I've had no issues. So I think that was the last of my heart kind of dealing with this thing that's in there now. And I read and researched, most of them go away after a year. And so I'm
Okay.
coming up on a year. So I think I'm through the thick of it.
Do they say that any kind of stress can trigger that sort of feeling in the heart, or is it just a
No.
chemical thing?
Well, again, because everybody's unique and it's kind of like, good luck. You might have some weird heart arrhythmias, but they can't really tell you. What I did learn is diet. And I've never been a drinker, like in 20 years, really. But, I'd go out with girlfriends and have a glass of wine or something. And within 24 hours or 48 hours of that, I was having them. So booze was like
Wow.
out. Like I couldn't touch it, not even one. And then my diet too. So brain science is really interesting on sugars and gluten affecting the brain. And so I
Mhm.
started reading a lot about the paleocardiologist has some really great, he was a cardiologist, married a chiropractor, and ended up kind of stepping away from mainstream medical
Nice.
and getting more into the nutrition about brain science. And that was really interesting. And sure enough, I was finding like if I, like in the hospital in the stroke unit, they're giving you all the grains and all the
Right.
sugar, pies and jellos and lasagnas, and they're not really current with brain recovery. But people that have concussions should really not touch gluten. So when I started to
Wow.
notice what I was eating and how it would affect my dizzy spells or my heart arrhythmias, I could absolutely source it back to a glutinous sugar or a few sips of wine, like a glass. It
Wow.
was like it would injure me.
Wow. Is it
Yeah.
because they're inflammatory? I know sugar and gluten can be inflammatory in the
I
body.
think so. And I think the way the brain processes glycogen, like I guess when you have any injury in the body, like athletes tend to know to stay away from those inflammatory things like gluten. The brain is hypersensitive to it. So it was
Interesting.
really like, I'd really literally feel like I was going to pass out in a normal conversation. Initially, I was like, I got to keep my blood sugar up. So, I'm going to eat a burrito with a flour tortilla wrap. And then an hour later, I was like, as soon as
Interesting.
I cleaned up my diet, and now I can eat pretty much anything and whatever because I'm out of that bulk of the early recovery. But it was very telling,
Hmm.
very telling. Yeah,
That is fascinating. And I love that you said it's probably similar for those who've had a concussion. Anytime
hmm
there's a brain injury, to be more sensitive to diet.
definitely, definitely. I wish it
Interesting.
was more talked about.
That is very interesting. Wow, I'm just fascinated with your story and the what you've learned and experienced. And is there anything else that you learned because of this that you want to share?
I think just an even bigger commitment and belief in taking responsibility personally to partner with the spiritual component to assure yourself of well-being, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So, like making a decision about what you want, right? Making a decision. So not being passive. I just think being passive and then in giving God all the credit is beautiful. I see that on social media all the time, but it's not really my belief in how it works. My belief in how it works is that God, the Spirit is like, what do you want? What do you want here? How do you want this to look? What do you want to get out of this? And you make the decision. That's why we're here, to participate, be active participants, not to be passive, like blowing with the wind and whatever God wants. And, I think we're presented with things that are all opportunities, and these trials are the biggest opportunities. And it's like, I don't know how this is going to get better, but this is going to be a launch pad for me, even like next
Mhm.
leveling my entire life. And I'm not even a year out yet. And I can't tell you how every single aspect of my life has gotten better.
I think that's amazing. I think
It
that's
is.
really amazing.
And it started with a decision I made that was going to be my story. And
Mhm.
then God took care of the rest.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
I'm
Oh,
still very much in recovery, but I mean, I'm like big mountain skiing, and I went on a solo sailing journey to the Caribbean last summer. It's remarkable. It's a miracle. I mean, it
yeah.
really is.
Amen to that. I do. I love that. Let's talk about your midwifery practice and how that's changed and improved. I suppose you said it tripled after the stroke.
Yeah.
And what you do and where people can find you, because I know, I'll just share this. I teach human development and we talk about birth, and I give my girls, they're mostly girls in my class, education that there are options out there for birthing children and different options. So I love that you are in the avenue. So share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I started having my first baby with an OB, like most people, at 24 years old, and that daughter is now 20. And I wasn't really thinking much about delivery or birth. My mother was knocked out on Demerol in the 70s when she had me, I think.
Yes.
And anyway, it was 7 or 8 months in that pregnancy where I started to ask questions of my OB, and I was actually pretty frightened of the answers I was getting. Like they were doing 95% episiotomies, and it was just like there's got to be another way. So I found a group of nurse midwives for that pregnancy and had an incredible experience, but still experienced a little bit of hospital just drama and trauma after the birth. that was all charted completely normal later when I looked. So we went home to birth the other 4 and found midwives to be completely up to par diagnostically and clinically, the home birth midwives, and very personalized, individualized care. And it just felt like, why don't more low risk women look at this as an option? So I started to be an advocate, and ultimately went back to school at age 30 and knew this is what I wanted to do. So I practiced in Utah. I've been here for 5 years. I worked for huge other midwife home birth practices where we would do 60 to 80 births a year between 2 or 3 of us. But I'm in solo practice the last few years, doing maybe, I would say on average 25 births a year or 30. And it's been incredible. I worried when I had this stroke that people weren't going to hire me because I just, who's going to hire a home birth midwife that just had a stroke? And somehow my business has tripled. And I've been very open and public about this. And when people have hired me, I've talked about this, but my clients I had through that stuck with me. I brought in a colleague to help, sort of hold my hand and help me with the births I had right after it occurred. And then, I've been very much in recovery and fine, and dealing with a practice that's tripled since my stroke in the last year. So I think it's just being really authentic and honest with people, and they can feel that in their safety in that, because they know that I'll make sure it's a safe situation. If I have to bring in help, I bring in help. If I can handle it, I handle it. So
that's amazing. So where can people find you if they're interested in that?
Sure. So my personal Instagram is at Shabby Ski, SHABBY ski, because I'm a big skier. My midwifery name is Sago Lily Midwifery. Sago Lily is the Utah state flower. So Sago Lily Midwifery. So I have a website as well as a Facebook page, and on Instagram under the same name at Sago Lily Midwife. Yeah, and you can see birth videos my clients have posted. And we do a lot of first-time moms and moms who this is their first home birth. And those are some of my favorites because they get to experience both. And that's a real gift to be able to give to somebody a different experience. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I'm actually an advocate for really education, but more natural things. I love that when we can work with our body in natural ways and kind of empower ourselves.
And I think for people out there looking at providers, whether you're in the medical model or more of an outside, home birth midwife model, you want to look for informed consent. For me, informed consent, so information about evidence-based care, whether it's diagnostic testing you're thinking of doing or not doing, or interventions prenatally or after the baby's arrived or during your birth, making sure you're fully informed and that you have the ability to give consent or not. And to me, that's a good provider. And both midwives and doctors are guilty on both ends of the spectrum of not delivering that properly. And so someone who's experienced hospital birth and then worked for a lot of different midwife groups, I would say informed consent is the number one thing, in addition to more holistic modalities for healing.
Nice. Well, thank you, Heather. This has been so enlightening and fun to hear your story. And I think it's beautiful and amazing that you're doing so well.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to listen to more of your episodes.
Thank you so much for listening to this miracle story. Please subscribe to my channel if you liked it. You can also find me on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and remember to notice and celebrate miracles